Welcome back to the CKM Red Rugby League channel. It is the end of round 6, so we are here to review what has happened in the world of the National Rugby League. Luke Jobson, and for the first time in about 2 years, Danaan Kerr joins us. Danaan, how you doing, mate?
Oh, I'm doing quite well, rugby league fans. It's an honour to be back on the page. I've missed you all, and I'm ready to review round 6 of the NRL 2020 season.
Yeah, the man formerly known as Boom is back with us. So, with that being said, we're not gonna hold us up too longer. We'll get straight into it. Starting off with Thursday night and a dominant performance by the Knights, 27-6 winners over a lackluster Brisbane Broncos, and Danaan, really all of it down the middle for the Knights early on. Their forward pack really took charge, and the Broncos just had no answer.
It was, to be fair, most fans saw it coming. Most NRL fans saw that result coming, unless you were north of the Tweed. 27-6, fair result. Knights struck early, Knights struck late. Broncos got an intercept try. Other than that, they never really looked like scoring.
A lot of, not necessarily a lot of controversy, but a lot of calls for Darius Boyd and Anthony Milford to be dropped for next week. There's been news come out that Anthony Seibold is seriously mulling the thought of bringing in Tom Dearden into the halves. What do you think about that?
I'm not the eighth immortal, but the eighth immortal said Milford was crap, so I'm in no position to argue. The eighth, and we are talking about Joey Johns here, obviously loves his Knights, but Milford was terrible, and that's being nice. He just didn't look threatening at all. He, I believe, only had 5 or 6 runs for less than 30 meters within the game. He's not a half or a 5'8" in today's modified game. He just doesn't have what it takes, it seems.
Yeah, the Knights forward pack just too strong. The Saifidi brothers and David Clemmer just ran riot over the Broncos forward pack, much to the protest of Payne Haas. But Kalen Ponga, we'd be remiss not to talk about him a little bit, signing a Knights record deal at the start of the week. You think he's worth that contract?
Kalen Ponga is potentially the best player we will see. Still very young, but the Knights won the game in the forwards. Clemmer and Saifidi, if Origins tomorrow, they probably are the starting props for New South Wales. They were just unbelievable. Short balls from McCulloch out of hooker, playing against his old side, and the experience of Mitchell Pearce. It was just the perfect mixture just to destroy the Broncos.
Yeah, the Knights, they move into the top 4. After that one, the Broncos definitely need to do some soul searching. Same can be said for the Warriors as we move on to Friday. 40-12, South Sydney up over the Warriors. The back fight, or really the back line for South Sydney having an absolute field day. I think it ended up being 5 of the 7 for the South Sydney backs running over the try line. And I think the biggest talking point out of the game is what happened yesterday as we record this. Steve Kearney gone from the Warriors.
I'm an Eels fan who thought Kearney should never have got a second coaching chance within the NRL. That's being completely honest. Nice guys finished last. That's Stephen Kearney for you. He, by all reports, is an absolutely amazing guy off the field. That's from previous players, referees, coaches, touch judges, etc., that I have spoken to within the NRL that have given me that information on Kearney. He's one of the nicest blokes. Again, Eels fan. So's Tim Manor. How many premierships did he win? Nice guys in the NRL doesn't mean you're great. Just because you're a nice guy doesn't mean you're cut out to make the top grade, especially when it comes to coaching. Coaching is the hardest job. I wouldn't put my hand up. I'd love to be a water runner, a trainer, physio, etc. for an NRL side. I'd hate to be a coach. The stress. You could coach the best side. You could coach the worst side. If they lose, it's your fault.
Mate, I don't think your knees have the capability to be a water boy or a trainer at the moment. But South Sydney, Cody Walker, Latrell Mitchell, Adam Reynolds, Damien Cook, Cam Murray. That spine is starting to come together very, very, very nicely. Latrell, two of his best games in the Bunnies uniform has been in the past 2 weeks. Do you think that now that Cody's back, now that Adam's back, the Bunnies, for the most part, are relatively healthy? Do you think that they have what it takes to start putting some pressure on the likes of the Parramatta Eels, of the Roosters, and potentially the Panthers?
Well, we'll find out next Thursday, because that is the first game of round 7. Do they have what it takes? I've got them in my top 4, but I'm umming and ahhing about the Panthers. Those two are my 4 and 5. Now, that's because we know what Latrell can do as a centre. Can he get that form as a fullback? They've just beat the Warriors, who I don't have in my top 8 because of their tough position within the 2020 season. And the week before, they versed the Titans, who, as strong in the terms of the Titans are going, they're going to get the wooden spoon. So really, Latrell's best 2 matches have come against 2 sides that won't be there when the finals come. Now's his chance. He's going to verse a Panthers side who are coming off a big win against the Storm. Let's see how he goes there. Cody Walker. I don't want to make this super coach chat, but I mentioned to you 2 weeks ago that I felt South are building, and that was because Cody Walker was coming back. He's just this game with the new rules. It's got Cody Walker written all over. He wants to run to the line. He wants to take it on constantly, and he just will run and run and run and run. And the best sides, the Roosters, the Eels, Manly, even though they haven't won every game since we've been back, their halves are running to the line. Their fullbacks are running to the line. They don't mind getting hit, but they're winning because of it. That's Cody Walker's game style. He doesn't mind taking a hit because he knows the second you don't hit him, he's through that line. And if he hasn't scored the try, he set it up.
Yeah, Cody Walker, definitely a key factor here for the Bunnies. All right, the second game of Friday night, Danaan, as you mentioned, the Panthers with, according to the betting market, an upset win over the Melbourne Storm, but it was a pretty clinical performance in the end by the Panthers, 21-14. Nathan Cleary looked at his best. I mentioned to Matt in the round preview that I didn't see Burton coming on for any time whatsoever during that game. He remained on the bench, but at the end of the day, it was a pretty clear-cut performance there from the Panthers as they cement themselves as a potential premiership contender.
It was the second best match of the round. Let's be honest. The Panthers are a very, very strong side, as are the Melbourne Storm. And it pretty much, it was the kick that Kickout scored off was the difference. If there was to be another draw this season, that was almost the match. If Kickout doesn't score off that kick, you're looking at the stats. 2 line breaks each. Tackle busts were roughly 23, 24 to 25, 26. So pretty much exactly the same. Their runs were almost identical. Their run meters, I believe the Panthers did slightly outdo them, but the post-contact meters, the Storm were able to bring it back. I do believe the Storm completed more sets, but the Panthers just done that little bit extra with theirs. But you mentioned it already, Burton on the bench, he was amazing. And if he landed those field goals against the Knights, he might be starting over Luai right now. But Luai, though he had no try assists in that game, he had his fingers on the game. And him and Cleary just work so well together. I can understand why Burton didn't get any minutes.
Yeah, and you look at the I think it was the first try, Crichton's try. Luai set up Mansour with that line break down the left-hand side. And you're right, while it was a Mansour try assist in the end, Luai was instrumental. And, yeah, you can't help but think that as much as we hype up the Storm, the 6 again rule is starting to hurt them. They're not the mobile side that we've tended to see them to be. They're a very physical side, don't get me wrong. But the mobility of the forward pack, I think, doesn't suit to the 6 again as it does for the Panthers or for the Roosters or Parramatta.
Well, the biggest one in that, Ryan Pappenhausen. The guy last year was an absolute freak. He was that good that he started the fullback this year for a reason. He hasn't made the same impact this season. And I don't know if it's because the Storm's game plan isn't as adapted to other sides. I'm unsure. But don't take away from the game. Josh Adokar didn't play. Late withdrawal due to the birth of his child. And Seve had 14 runs for 130 odd meters, roughly, less than 10 meters a run. Now, Adokar, if it's a totally different game. If Adokar's there, it's a different game. They targeted Seve a lot, as you would, as anyone would, when you've got Vunivalu and Pappenhausen. And you've then got he's still an NRL player, but he's not Pappenhausen, he's not Vunivalu, and he's not Josh Adokar. It was a really smart game plan by the Panthers. Get it to Seve, pin him in the corner, work real hard on whoever was taking the second run. Josh Adokar plays, it may have been a different story, but it was a really smart game plan from the Panthers, and they stuck to it the whole game, and they deserved the win. They really did. It was a really good game to watch.
Yeah, you can't deny that. I think the other thing that stands out, Seve, you mentioned no Adokar is no winger. He was on the left wing, generally is a right centre for the Storm. So a couple of plays out of position didn't help their cause. Very quickly before we move on to Saturday's game, where do you see the Storm this year? I think they're still going to make the 8, no doubt, but will they be there or thereabouts come preliminaries grand final?
The 8 doesn't change right now, as in Eels, Knights, Panthers, Roosters, Raiders, Storm, Seagulls, Rabbits. Sorry, Tigers fans, you're going to be finished 9th again. But Storm, I can't see them beating any side above them under the new rules. And it's just they are so good at the wrestle. The wrestle's gone. It's no longer here. The wrestle is what the Storm created in the game, and unfortunately, due to the one ref, unfortunately due to this 6 again rule, it's no longer here. So I don't see how they beat. Well, they've already lost to the Raiders. The Roosters would beat them. The Panthers just beat them. The Knights, I know that they've recently just beat the Knights, but if that game was tomorrow, I think the Knights would beat them. The Knights they'd beat the Raiders the week before. I just got that feeling that the Knights went into that game a little like, oh, we just beat the Raiders. The Raiders are probably going to be in the grand final. Melbourne aren't as good as what they were. You know, I've got them just outside the top 4.
Yeah, I could see that happening. 2 teams though, as we move into Saturday, that probably shouldn't be anywhere near the top 8 come the back end of the season, the Dragons and the Titans. And what was billed as the clash for the wooden spoon for a lot of pundits, the Dragons' spine not being touched for the first time this season, and they make it 2 wins on the trot with 20-8. Matt Duffy, superb as normal. Ben Hunt coming off the bench was fantastic. Corey Norman probably had his best game. Adam Clune was superb, and the Titans. I think the biggest question for the Titans coming out of this week is whether they play Ash Taylor next week or if they drop him and play Tanya Boyd, because Taylor has looked like absolute crud.
Ash Taylor. It's, what do you say? He's got the makings of a champion. If you put him alongside a Jonathan Thurston in the Indigenous All-Stars, you think this guy has the world in front of him. You put him in a side where the forwards aren't making the meters, you just got nothing. He's one of those guys, you put him under a Wayne Bennett, you put him under a Craig Bellamy, you put him under a Trent Robertson. He's a top 5 halfback by the end of the year. He's in a side that doesn't have enough go forward, and he's just, unfortunately, he's struggling because of it. Halfbacks in today's game struggle to get on top if their forwards aren't getting the momentum. And Ash Taylor in the last 3 years is probably the best example of that.
You have to think he played 1 game for the Broncos, was signed to $1 million deal after Daly Cherry Evans backflipped all those years ago. But he's also come in with a team that really just, they don't have the roster. You could really go back to when Jared Haynes signed. As us two as Parramatta fans will know, there was plenty of controversy around that one. But he hasn't had the playing group around him. On his day, Ash Taylor is one of the best halfbacks of the comp. But unfortunately, and I mean, you could say the same for comparing him to Corey Norman. On their day, they are a make or break type of player. They can set apart a game like the snap of a finger, but they just don't have the players around them. In terms for the Dragons, 2 wins on the trot after McGregor was given the 4-game ultimatum. The draw doesn't get easier from here on out for them, but do you think Mary's done enough to see the year?
They gave Mary a 4-game ultimatum because they didn't want to give a brand new coach to what really when the 4-game ultimatum was given, no one thought they'd beat the Sharks. They thought maybe they'll beat the Knights. Next week they're going to get flogged by the Roosters. The week after they're going to get flogged again by the Raiders, and Mary's going to be out of a job. You're not going to put a brand new coach into what the Dragons would consider 3 of their 4 hardest games of the year.
Fair enough. But I think it's safe to say though that even if James Graham does leave, what they have at the moment, or at least over the last 2 games, is working with the spine how it is. Trent Merrin starting, and then Cam McInnes playing that rolling lock for 60 minutes. You'd have to say that McInnes is probably one of the most underrated players since the break in terms of his productivity and at least his defensive impact.
It's definitely defense. McInnes is just a machine when it comes to tackling. He does he miss a tackle? I don't think so. I can't remember. If he has, I can't remember it. He just doesn't stop. But again, you're talking about time-wise, he's not an 80-minute hooker. That's because Ben Hunt, could he be the best hooker in the comp? I don't know. But he's a hell of a hooker. He's not a halfback. He can make his tackles in the center of the field. He can produce a great ball from the ground real quick, real crisp. And he has a kicking game. He has everything it takes to be a really good hooker in the NRL. And by being a hooker and not a halfback, he doesn't have the pressure.
I think I don't know about the best hooker. I still think Cam Smith, for as much as you and I might dislike him being Para fans, Cam Smith I think is still the best hooker by a country mile. But with what they have now with Hunt, and I said this last week or 2 weeks ago, I'd be more than happy paying him $1 million a year if he comes on for 60 minutes and plays like how he does the last 2 weeks. Performed brilliantly. And
you're right.
But we'll see. The Dragons, as you mentioned, against 2 of the premiership favourites in the next 2 weeks. We'll see how they go. The 5:30 game, I don't know how to feel about this one. It was a tale of 2 halves. The Tigers were up, 34-0. It was an equal record for the biggest halftime lead, I believe, in club history. And then they put the cue in the rack. They allowed the Cowboys to come back. They scored 3 tries in about 3 or 4 tries in about 15 minutes after halftime, and the Tigers did enough, but I don't know. It's hard to point out certain players because a couple of those Tigers tries were pure luck of the bounce.
The Tigers just had one of those halves. They don't come around very often, but when they do, you need to make the most of it, and that's exactly what they did. They finished with only 1 player on the bench. Jennings didn't finish the game. Twal didn't finish the game. I think it was Musgrove as well. So 3 of their starting 13. And you're talking a winger, a lock who plays 80 minutes as well. And then you've got a prop who has been playing quite well. And a lot of minutes as well. Once you take those 3 away, if they didn't start as well as they did, if they didn't get the bounce of the ball like they did, they don't win that game. The Cowboys probably come home the strongest side as they were. In saying that, if they didn't have those injuries, the Tigers could have won that by 50. I think it just had to do with those 3 injuries. If any team loses a winger, a starting prop, and their lock, they'd struggle in the second half.
Yeah, for sure. And, you pull up, I think, the running meters for the Tigers. You had Nofo, 200-plus per usual. Adam Dewey, 134. But they only had one forward go over 100 meters. Josh Aloiai with, I've butchered his name, Aloiai, there we go, 113 meters. Next best was Cheekham and Eisenhuth coming off the bench for 90. And I think, that not only does that demonstrate just how good they were in the first half, that their forwards didn't have to make those meters because they were forcing the errors from the Cowboys. But they had to defend in that second half.
The game was... A game's not over after the kickoff. But when your best player, as in Tamalolo, drops the ball and you score immediately, the confidence they got from that, the heads of the Cowboys went down. I tipped the Tigers. I felt the game was over already after that. But within 5 minutes, it's just like, Tigers have got this. It would have to take a miracle for the Tigers to not win.
But after the 55th minute, when the Cowboys went in, I think 60th minute, they had 3 tries in 7 minutes. Kyle Felt with his second. We both were a little bit nervous, to say the least. But I think we have to recognise as well for the Cowboys is they have no Michael Morgan. He is essentially their hero in attack. No Val Holmes this week nor next week. Paul Green's already confirmed that. Can the Cowboys make the 8? Because right now I'm not feeling it.
Well, if they're to make the 8, who do they knock out? Put it that way. They're versing the Knights next week. It's at home. If the Knights don't beat them by 12 or more, I'll be shocked. The week after, they've got the Eels at Penquest. If the Eels don't beat them by 20, let's be honest, if the Eels play like they did last night, and the Cowboys do the same, the Eels should win that by absolute landslide. I believe the week after that, they've got the Roosters. And again, if the Roosters play like they did last night, the Cowboys might not score a try in that game.
I mean, it's a perfect segue to go into the 7:30 game, the match of the round. The Roosters and Parramatta. I tipped Parramatta. I went heart over head, and it came back to bite me. But the Eels, a superb performance by them for the first 65 minutes. The Roosters in the end, though, just too good. Even with no Tedesco and a cork to Daniel Tupou, the Roosters just bombarded the Eels' defense in the first half. Parramatta were able to come back and take that 10-8 lead, but you could tell in that last 20 minutes that goal line stand for essentially the whole first half just took it out of Parramatta.
The Eels went that good. People don't realise that the Roosters completed 9 extra sets in that game. The Roosters had a 90% completion rate. The Roosters ran for 200 extra meters. They had an extra 12 tackle breaks. It was just... as an Eels fan, I couldn't be prouder. I don't think I've ever been so proud of a loss as an Eels fan. Not even if. The Roosters have done that the last 3 weeks and they've flogged every side. The Eels just didn't give up. And that's not the Eels that I know, which is amazing. They stuck in. The experience of the Roosters came in. I, as an Eels fan, probably done exactly the same as what the players done. They got 10-8 up. Teddy just got injured. And I messaged friends, family, we've got this. Teddy's gone. We're on top. Rooster scored. Jeez, it felt like 2 minutes. I think it was 2 minutes to be exact after those messages were sent. And we just never looked back in it again. That's the Roosters. That's how good they are. The Eels would have learnt so much from that, but that shows why the Roosters are the favourites to win the comp. Just when you think they're gone, just when they lose the best player in the world, they do something else. And they get the win. It was such an even game. And really, you think about it, it was poor discipline. It was a lack of experience in big game matches from the Eels because until Jennings got sin-binned, it was 2 tries each. It was a nail-biter. And it was such a good era. But again, it comes down to the discipline. 7 penalties to 3, the Eels. 11 errors to 4, Eels. You're not going to beat the Roosters. The Roosters could have had 12 men for the whole game. If you're going to pump out those numbers, you won't beat them.
a 73% completion rate for Parramatta in the end. I think what took them down, but I'm not going to talk about how proud I am. You've already done that of Parramatta. The Roosters, you have to think they're the premiership favourites, even with no Tedesco. The scary part, this is what I told you, the scary part is that they looked better without Tedesco in the last 20 minutes. And granted, yes, Parramatta were tired. You saw Reid Marnie dropping off a couple of tackles. Jennings was sin-binned. But that's how good this Roosters team is if Tedesco isn't going to play next week, you'll have Brett Morris go to fullback, and Ryan Hall, who's an absolute gun and an England international, Super League record holder, he'll just slot in, run for 200 meters, and he'll have done his job.
Brett Morris is amazing. The Morris brothers are amazing. Ryan Hall, he's only had to come in when needed. I don't think he's had a real test yet in the NRL. It's the first time the Roosters have had to change gear this year. They showed they can, but put it this way, if it was a more experienced side, such as the Storm, such as the Raiders, I don't think once that Roosters team fell behind against either of those two sides, I don't think the Roosters would have come back, because those two sides are a bit more experienced. They wouldn't have switched off like the Eels did. The Eels thought they had it. At 10-8, the Eels thought they were good. The Storm would have pounded them. The Raiders would have pounded them. And that's where the experience is going to – the Eels players are going to learn from that experience. They're going to take that one, put it in the memory bank and think, all right, just because we're ahead, just because we're on top doesn't mean we've got it won. You're telling me a Cameron Smith side would have let that 10-8 slip so quickly? You're telling me a Josh Hodgson-led side would have let that 10-8 slip so quickly? I don't think so. That was an inexperienced Eels side in big games, because let's face it, they haven't been in big games much for the past
decade.
Years. They've had decade really. They've had, geez, you could probably count it on your hand how many big games. Let's face it, the biggest games they've had, they've been against the Broncos and they've flogged them.
Yeah, 59-0, 58-0 last year, but then got swept by the Storm second week 2 years ago.
It.
Yeah, but you mentioned the Raiders potentially not letting that lead slip. The Raiders may not have a lead from here on out if their attack keeps going the way that it does. 14-6 in favour of Manly in the first Sunday game. Tommy Turbo, the big news, probably out for. They say 4 to 6 weeks with a grade 2 hammy strain, but you have to keep in mind Turbo was out for 9 weeks with a similar injury last year or 2 years ago. But Manly, despite losing 3 players, they just defensively were incredible. And some of that I think you can put towards the fact that the Raiders just didn't have an attack. George Williams looks like he almost just doesn't want to touch the ball today. But Manly too good. Can we consider them as underdogs for the premiership?
What's an underdog? Explain to me what an underdog is, and I'll explain whether they can or can't be. Manly have one of the best fullbacks if he's on his game, but on every third week he seems to be the Matt Moylan of fullbacks, and he's injured. You can't win a comp if your best player gets injured every 3 weeks. So if Manly stayed fit all year, and I remember they didn't have Marty to be out today as well, so they're missing one of the best props in the game.
Nor did they have Moses Sawley, who's become one of the better centres.
Exactly. And that's it. Manly have a strong, really strong 17. They've probably got a strong 19. But to replace Tommy Turbo, as you said with the Roosters, they don't have... The Roosters can lose a fullback. Someone slot straight in. Manly, they don't have someone else that can slip straight in. And honestly, they're only playing the Sharks next week, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Sharks beat them because Manly rely so much on that DTE turbo combination, and it just when it's not there, you see how much they struggle. But the Raiders, I don't know what happened there. They just it's a home game. I don't know, but they were just off. They had one of those days. They were off from the first minute till the last. They were lucky to score a try, to be honest. If Turbo doesn't get injured, Manly probably win that by 24, 30 odd points.
I don't know about 24 or 30, but I think they score more, that's for sure. But I don't know, we keep talking about the Raiders as premiership favourites, but they haven't exactly played crash hot the last couple of weeks. They a 14-6 win against the Tigers, but it didn't fill us with confidence. 34-18, they go down to the Knights in round 4, and then today's 14-6 loss to Manly. They're going to make the top 8. There's no doubt about that. But can they go that one step further this year, or do you think that last year was their shot?
I think last year was their run. They might have a run in another 2 or 3 years' time, but I think last year was their run. The Raiders, they're too hot and cold. Josh Hodgson, amazing player, but you don't know what it is with the Raiders. You can feel so confident tipping them. And I did in this game. I really thought they were going to, with the couple of players Manly had out, I really thought they were going to win and win comfortably. Now, I don't know if it's the fact that they're not playing at home. Now, this could all change very soon with the NRL bubble about to burst, so to speak. And players like, it was cold today in Western Sydney. Imagine how cold it would have been in Canberra. Does that change things? I don't know, but it's an interesting one because if you look 1-17 when the Raiders are fit, they're one of the best 1-17s in the comp. But they done the same a couple of years ago. They made it to the game before the preliminary. And then they disappeared the year after. Is it going to be the same case this year? I hope not, because I enjoy watching their football, but it just may be.
Yeah, look, 14 errors to 6 and the wrong side of 7-2 penalty count. That doesn't help their favour as well. When you only complete 69% of your sets against Manly, you're asking to be beaten, and beaten they were. Last game of the round. I nearly didn't watch this game because I thought it was going to be an absolute snooze fest. But the Sharks and the Bulldogs put on a pretty enjoyable game of football to watch in some topsy-turvy conditions. The Sharks, 20-18. But I think the thing that I took out of this more than anything is that, well, two things. One, Matt Moylan needs to let Will Kennedy have that fullback spot at the Sharks, and the Dogs on their day, I think, could be a very good team to upset some of the premiership contenders. Let me preface, if they play at Belmore. If they play at Belmore and someone like Melbourne comes in, I would not be too surprised if the Dogs played at their best and got the upset.
The Dogs play that type of gritty game that if it's raining, it just falls perfectly into their hands. And that's exactly what today was. It was a sloppy game. But sloppy is what the Dogs like. They like that real tough wrestle in wet conditions. It's just... both sides completed at 85%. The run meters were similar. The post contact meters were similar. Line breaks, I think, was only one difference. The sin binning of Wakeham, I think that hurt. I think that was a big turning point in the match. It was such a silly play because the Sharks scored, I think, within 30 seconds or 60 seconds after him being sin binned, and even though the Bulldogs scored while he was in the bin, it just that extra point hurt, and it turned out to be the difference when only losing by 2. That those points that were scored while he was off were the difference.
Yeah, Wakeham definitely should be the 7 moving forward, though, for the Bulldogs. He, based on today's performance, should be there over Lachlan Lewis. Sione Katoa, a hat-trick, his first in the NRL. Townsend, his first try assist. Really since like round 23 last year.
He didn't get 1, he got 2.
Oh, there you go. But Matt Moylan had to go off after a monster hit from Wateni Zelezniak that would make any neutral fan cream themselves. It just, for me, Matt Moylan, and on his day, he is and can be one of the best players in the NRL. We saw that when he went to the Panthers. When he was at the Panthers, we saw that when he first came over to the Sharks. But injuries are starting to take their toll on him. And Matt, I harped on it last week, I think, with Matty. But Will Kennedy, this can't do his confidence any good. So, son of Bubba Kennedy, a really good player in his own right. But Kennedy's just starting to make that position his own, and then Moylan comes in for a week, then out for a week, then in for a week. He was taken off for a HIA assessment tonight after that hit. Now, granted, they play next Sunday again, but if Moylan's out, Kennedy comes back in to then probably see Moylan come back in 2 weeks' time. Surely at this point, Moylan does the right thing for the team, lets Kennedy take that fullback spot, and either figures out another position, be it a bench utility, or says, you know what, I'm not healthy enough to play every round. Go find a team that is okay with that, or just retire.
It's a very tough one when I'm trying to think. Moylan would be 29, I believe. It's a tough one. He's no spring chicken anymore in the world of rugby league, but he's still got 6 years ahead of him if he has a long career. But I almost feel like it's time he gives Super League a call. It's one of those ones. He'll be sitting on his couch many decades after he retires, thinking, "Imagine what I could have done if I didn't have busted hamstrings." He's one hell of a talent, but unfortunately, if you just don't have the legs, if you don't have the muscle for the game. And that's the thing with a hamstring injury, because that seems to be his main concern. He does it, and Tommy Turbo is sliding into that same category. Tommy Turbo could be the best in the world right now, but it seems every 5 games he does his hemi for 3 weeks. Moylan's worse than that. He had the world at his fingertips, and then just it's injury after injury after injury. And it's really unfortunate because when he was flying high, didn't matter what team he was playing for, you wanted to watch the game because you just knew he was going to put on a show.
Yeah, well, it's a tough one for John Morris, who himself is under a little bit of speculation. But we've been saying the same thing about Kieran Foran for years now. He when he came through, when he played at the Warriors and then at Manly, he was, outside of JT, the premier 5'8" in the competition. But, he went to the Bulldogs and has been hampered with injury after injury. But you can tell that this Dogs team is just 10 times better with him in it. And I think if we go and look at next week, they, depending on what Tigers side shows up, could be playing a very winnable game.
Oh, Kieran Foran. He's not worth $1 million. He's playing in a side that really need that spare cash that he's taking up right now. With injuries aside, again, like the Moylan, Kieran Foran should be on 350 max. And imagine what they could be doing with an extra 650. Imagine the gun prop for the Bulldogs right now on 650. With the grit, the determination that team has, that never say die attitude. They don't have what it takes to win games because they don't have the talent, but they've got the passion, they've got the drive. Imagine if they've got another player that could help them. Like big one, Clemmer. That was a massive loss. Imagine a Clemmer right now, because that really 650k. That's probably what Clemmer would have been on if he was still there. The Bulldogs wouldn't be sitting in 15th right now with only one win if Clemmer was at that club. That extra money that Foran's taking, and the Sharks are very similar. The extra money Moylan's taking, these big game players that aren't playing a lot of big games with injury are taking up so much salary cap space that it really affects a side that is in the bottom half of the ladder because they just don't have the backup players to fill the spaces required.
So, hypothetically, let's say in a year's time or whenever Foran's contract comes up, he retires, doesn't re-sign, and they free up that. Yeah, I think he is on, around about $1 million. Who do you go for? Do you go for someone that is coming up? Do you try and target someone like Cooper Johns down in Melbourne, who's behind Jerome Hughes and at the moment Riley Jacks? Do you invest that money into keeping Brandon Wakeham around, or do you go looking for potentially one of the Saifidi brothers? Maybe. Do you look at potentially poaching one of, if not both?
Well, that's the thing. With $1 million, if Foran doesn't re-sign, why not two of them? With $1 million, you could get a inexperienced half that has the world at his fingertips and a gun prop. And don't say inexperienced halves can't win you the comp, because Daly Cherry Evans and Kieran Foran done it at Manly with a gun forward pack. A never say die attitude forward pack. Now, I'm not saying the Bulldogs next year could win the comp with an inexperienced half along with one prop signing, but it's all about planning. You've got to understand that Cobb's just, I can't remember. It may be the Panthers back in 2003, but I can't remember a side that really went from the bottom to the top and actually won the comp within a year or two. I really can't remember such a quick jump. I think the Panthers 01, I may be wrong here, but I think they got the spoon in 01 and won it in 03. The Bulldogs would be in very similar positions. So if they were to lose Foran by two really good players, and then the year after again recruit amazingly, would be potentially in a position to strike for the title, but it's not going to happen overnight, Bulldogs fans.
Let me follow up. Do you target someone like Blake Green, who you could sign for 200, 300, 400 a year, invest in a prop, build your team around someone like Brandon Wakeham, who for me is the incumbent, I guess, guy to build around, knowing that you still have Will Hopper-White, Dallin Watene-Zelezniak. Jake Avarillo is looking to become a really good little player there for the Dogs. You still have Josh Jackson. You still have Dylan Harper. They've got the talent. Do you bring someone in like Blake Green for 2 years at 3,400, let him finish his career there, and then have Wakeham there to take the reins?
You buy someone like the Green if you think Wakeham is that halfback, if you think he is the controller in 2 years' time. Green would be amazing in a lot of clubs like the Bulldogs if you've got that next person ready to come behind. So again, it's probably Green would be someone like Ash Taylor would also benefit from, that calm, steady head that just has that experience. It's the answer. It probably is yes. If they think Wakeham is that person that's going to be leading that side in 3 years' time. If Wakeham isn't the person that's going to be leading them in 3 years' time, they'd almost be better off signing 2 more gun forwards. Using that $1 million and being like, mate, come to this club. You're getting how many minutes you want as a prop. You're going to get them. Here they are. How many minutes you want as a second row? Whoever they buy, it's a blank check. How many minutes you want? They're yours if you can prove yourself.
Fair enough. All right. Well, that'll do it for us. Round 6, probably one of the most exciting this season so far. Keep having a look with CKM Red Rugby League. We're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on YouTube. Chuck us a like, a subscribe, a follow. Do what you need to do. Danaan, welcome back, buddy. It's good to have you back.
It was good to be back, and I look forward to chatting with a lot of you in the not too distant future.
All right, that'll do it. Until next week, see you later.